Where do I even start with this? Never in my life have I ever seen it coming that the most powerful Mac I've ever used would be a little silver box, not even big enough for my cat to sit on. But this computer the size of a lunchbox is what's housing Apple's most powerful chip to date, the M1 Ultra. So why don't I start with that? Flashback to March earlier this year. The existence of the M1 Ultra chip itself caught me completely by surprise because I thought the M1 Max was already the endgame. Now, the Ultra is unique in a sense that it could no longer fit on a single die anymore, so it's achieved by physically combining two M1 Max chips. But as far as we and the software are concerned, this behaves like one powerful chip. Still, I can't help but geek out a bit at the technology behind it, considering the bandwidth between the two M1 Max chips is 2.5 terabytes per second. Apple calls this Ultra Fusion, which effectively now arms you with the power of two M1 Max chips right inside here in the form of M1 Ultra. And that brings me to... As somebody who makes videos for a living, a powerful editing machine does wonders for my mental health. Now, I'm sure my industry is not the only one benefiting from really fast computers, but I'll speak for what I've seen for myself, and that's how amazing this thing is for slicing up videos. Clearly, if I just keep using the word amazing to describe it, you're not going to be very convinced. So let's talk use cases. As an appetizer, transcoding a 5-minute 4K HEVC clip into ProRes 422 takes only 10 seconds. Now let's turn the heat up. In FCP, I've got a 1-minute 4K timeline with heavy color grading and a few layers of text on top. Scrubbing through it is smooth as ever, and playback is instant without any dropped frames. By the way, I've intentionally disabled background rendering, and the preview is set to better quality. Exporting this took 12 seconds, and just for the heck of it, this is how long it takes to export the same timeline when I disable the color grading and text. Yeah. And even when you're doing a full-on export in FCP, the M1 Ultra still has so much resource left over, it barely seems bothered when you continue using the Mac for other tasks. And that includes playing a game while waiting for your render to finish, which itself doesn't really take all that long anyway. Also, whatever SSDs Apple's put in here have got zero chill as well. Speed tests are giving me write speeds of over 6 gigabytes per second and read speeds of over 5 gigabytes per second. And yes, gigabytes, not gigabits. So it's highly unlikely that your SSD speeds are going to bottleneck your performance. An extreme testament to this would be accessing 18 8K ProRes video files in FCP simultaneously by playing all of them back at once. Now, despite the fact that the SSD was being read at over 4 gigabytes per second, it still has headroom to spare. Now, I've always wondered what would happen if I tried playing these 18 streams of 8K on an M1 Max. I'm gonna be very realistic about it. Even though the M1 Ultra does have twice the resources of the M1 Max, you're not gonna find everything to be twice as fast on the Ultra. I believe a lot of it is up to the software's ability to make use of those extra resources. Basically, it depends on what you're doing with it. For many tasks, the performance improvement is quite modest on the Ultra. Take exporting this 5-minute 4K timeline, for example. It's an actual segment from my edit of my studio display review, Sony FX6 footage shot in H.264. Every clip has a LUT applied and a layer of color correction. M1 Ultra finished exporting in 30 seconds and the M1 Max in 43 seconds. Now, don't get me wrong, those were great results, but I personally was not convinced. There has to be more to it. Sure enough, there are some tasks that really push the systems to their limits, and that's when you truly see just how much more powerful the M1 Ultra is. This is Topaz Video Enhanced AI. We're going to use artificial intelligence to upscale 720p footage to 4K. This is a very resource-intensive and time-consuming process. Working on a 1-minute source clip, the M1 Max took almost 12 minutes, and the Ultra 7 minutes and 10 seconds. Next up, we have noise reduction in Davinci Resolve. This test is particularly taxing on the GPU, and as a note, I am testing two machines sitting on two extremes, a baseline M1 Max Mac Studio with 24-core GPU up against a maxed out 64-core GPU M1 Ultra. Admittedly, it's not the fairest of test conditions, but it's what I can get my hands on. We'll run both temporal and spatial noise reduction set to 50, and with temporal set to 5 frames maxed out. This is very heavy noise reduction. Playing the timeline back on the M1 Max, I'm getting about 7 to 8 frames per second of playback. Over on the Ultra, it's a much more workable 16 to 17 frames per second. Exporting this 20-second noise reduction timeline took 1 minute and 18 seconds on the baseline M1 Max and 35 seconds on the Ultra. Finally, the ultimate test. Playing back 18 streams of 8K ProRes video simultaneously. This is an official Apple claim of the M1 Ultra's capabilities, and I have personally tested it to be true in a dedicated video. So then how far out of the M1 Max's league is this? Well, here it is on the M1 Max, and initiating playback, you can see it's clearly overloaded. This is in rather surreal contrast to the M1 Ultra, somehow managing to not drop even a single frame. Now, exporting this in 8K, the M1 Max finished in 3 minutes and 42 seconds, and the Ultra was done in 52 seconds. With a machine this powerful, it would be within reason to assume it might run pretty hot, wouldn't it? Thing is, when I pointed my thermal camera at it, it barely registered a heat signature even after being on for a few days straight. I made it render a video, and the exhaust vents were still cool to the touch, reading at just over 30 degrees. The hottest I was ever able to make it go was have it play back those 18 ProRes streams, to which the exhaust vents achieved a cozy 40 degrees. And if you head on over to the spec sheet for the Mac Studio, you can see it's got a max power draw of 370 watts. Again, very reasonable considering its performance, except it's nowhere near that in reality. Guess how many watts my Mac Studio was drawing from the wall while I was transcoding a bunch of clips in compressor? Between 20 to 30 watts. Yet again, the highest amount of power I was able to make it draw was by doing that 18 streams of ProResing again, because it maxes out both the CPU and GPU. And with that, I got around 150 watts. Still so far away from that theoretical 370 watts. What? If you told someone a few years ago that'd be a computer this powerful yet this power efficient, I don't think anyone would have believed you. Well, screw that, even right now I'm finding it hard to believe that this is possible. I'm curious how long it would be before video codecs become so demanding to the point that we think an M1 Ultra is no longer sufficient. But at the moment, that day doesn't yet exist in my precognition. And until that day comes, maybe I'll see you in one of my other videos.